Evenings in my neighborhood have always followed a calm rhythm. Porches glowing, crickets humming, the comfort of knowing exactly when Michael would walk through the door. That rhythm shifted the night he told me, almost casually, that he'd started running after dark. He made it sound so innocent, like a fresh attempt to get healthy, to clear his head. I smiled and encouraged him, proud he was taking care of himself. At first, I believed it. I really did. But little by little, things didn't quite add up, and once I noticed the cracks, I couldn't unsee them. The first time it happened, I leaned in to tease him after one of his so-called runs. I expected sweat, maybe the sharp tang of exertion, but instead, I caught a whiff of perfume, sweet, powdery, and not mine. My smile froze, though I covered it with a laugh, pretending I hadn't noticed. He waved me off quickly, scoffing, telling me I was being paranoid. That word, paranoid, echoed inside me long after he said it, because I knew myself too well. I wasn't imagining things. I kept watching, quietly. His running shoes stayed spotless, as if they'd never touched dirt. His energy when he came home wasn't the fatigue of a man who'd just pushed his body. It was something else, something sharper, like a secret thrill he couldn't hide. I let him think I was convinced, let him believe his dismissive tone had silenced me. But deep down, I was already filing away every detail. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Silence isn't surrender, it's preparation. The funny thing about lies is how they unravel when you're paying attention. Michael thought his scoffs and quick retorts were enough to shut me down, but he underestimated me. I've spent years reading the smallest shifts in his tone, the pauses between his words, the way his shoulders rise when he's cornered. He thought I was just a wife, distracted by routines, but I was watching with sharper eyes than he could imagine. Each night run became less about fitness and more about performance. His, not mine. I started noticing how energized he seemed when he got back, almost giddy, like someone who'd been given a secret gift. No heavy breathing, no flushed cheeks, no damp shirt clinging to his skin. He came home cleaner than when he left, except for that one damning trace, the perfume. The scent was never the same strength. It lingered one night like a whisper, another like a slap, but always there. And every time my chest tightened, not from doubt, but from the weight of knowing. I played my role well, though. I cheered him on, joked about maybe running alongside him, even offered to buy him new gear. He brushed me off quickly, too quickly, almost irritated. That was when I felt it deep in my bones. Something wasn't right. And while his lies might have worked on someone else, I'd lived too many years by his side to mistake truth for fiction. My patience stretched thin, but it didn't break. I was waiting, quietly, for the moment when the truth would show itself. One evening, as he laced his pristine shoes, I leaned against the doorway, arms folded, a smile tugging at my lips. "So, how many miles tonight?" I asked, half teasing. He didn't meet my eyes, just mumbled something about not keeping count, then rushed out before I could press further. That's when it hit me. Not just suspicion, but certainty. People who tell the truth don't rush. They don't flinch at simple questions. He was protecting something, and it wasn't his health. I sat on the couch that night, listening to the hollow quiet of the house. I thought back to all the years we'd shared. Holidays, arguments, reconciliations, laughter over burnt dinners. How quickly it can all shift. How the smallest crack can reveal a canyon beneath the surface. My chest ached, not just with anger, but with something heavier, the ache of being underestimated. He thought I wouldn't notice. He thought love would blind me. That was his mistake. By the time he returned, smelling again of someone else's world, I had already made up my mind. I wouldn't shout, I wouldn't cry. No, if he wanted to play games, then I'd learn the rules better than him. His night runs were about to become mine too. Not with sneakers and sweat, but with silence and strategy. And that's when the idea of finding proof first sparked inside me, waiting for the perfect moment to catch fire. When trust shatters, it doesn't do it loudly, it crumbles quietly, piece by piece. I knew words alone wouldn't expose Michael. He was too good at twisting them, too practiced at calling me paranoid. so I decided to let evidence do the talking. One afternoon, while he was distracted in the shower, I slipped into the garage and placed a small GPS tracker under the seat of his car. My hands shook as I did it, not from fear, but from the weight of the choice. This wasn't the kind of thing I ever imagined doing, but then again, I never imagined being lied to this way either. The first night I checked the tracker, I almost wanted to be wrong. I stared at the little blinking dot on my phone, praying it would stop near the park like he always claimed. For a moment, my heart raced when it looked like he was headed there. But then, slowly, deliberately, the dot veered off course, moving farther and farther from home. Not toward any park, not toward any trail. No, straight across town. My throat tightened as I followed every turn, every street. He wasn't running. He was driving into someone else's life. Curiosity pulled me into my car before I had time to second-guess myself. I drove carefully, headlights dimmed, my palms slick against the steering wheel. When I reached the address where the tracker stopped, my breath caught. It wasn't a gym. It wasn't a store. It was an apartment complex, windows glowing soft against the night. And there, right in front of me, was Michael, stepping out of his car with that energy I knew too well. Only this time, he wasn't running. He was walking toward her. I stayed in the shadows, heart pounding like it wanted to leap out of my chest. From where I sat, I watched him walk up to the building, his stride confident, too confident. And then she appeared, a woman I'd never seen before, stepping out of the doorway like she'd been waiting for him all along. They didn't hesitate, not even a glance around. He kissed her like a man who had no wife, no vows, no history tethering him at home. My stomach turned, but my hands, they were steady. Instinct told me to look away, to spare myself the sight, but I didn't. I reached for my phone instead, my fingers moving as if they belonged to someone else. The click of the camera was quiet, but to me, it sounded like thunder in the still night. I took pictures, then a short video, proof that no excuse, no gaslighting could erase. Each shot felt like armor sliding into place, protecting me from the storm I knew was coming. Oddly enough, I didn't cry. Not then. I thought I might, but all I felt was clarity, a cold steadiness I hadn't expected. Sitting there in the dark, watching the man I'd shared a life with betray me so openly, I realized something. I wasn't powerless. He thought the lies gave him control, but really they just handed me the keys to my own freedom. I slipped the phone back into my bag, turned on the ignition, and drove home. I had no need to confront him that night. Revenge, after all, requires patience. When Michael came home later that night, he carried himself with the same fake exhaustion, stretching his arms, pretending he'd been pounding pavement. I almost laughed at the performance. Instead, I smiled sweetly, asked if he wanted tea, and listened to him ramble about long runs and tight calves. Every word felt like theater, and I applauded silently in my head. Because now, I had the script, I had the photos, and most importantly, I had time. I slipped into bed beside him, my body calm, my breathing steady, though inside my mind was on fire. I could have thrown the evidence in his face right then, watched him stammer and squirm, but what satisfaction would that bring? No, I wanted more than just an argument. I wanted him to choke on his own lies, to watch them unravel in front of others who once believed in him. That kind of justice needed staging, patience, and the right audience. As he drifted off to sleep, blissfully unaware of the storm quietly forming beside him, I stared at the ceiling, already shaping my plan. This wasn't going to be about screaming or throwing things. That would make me small, and he'd expect it. No, my revenge would be precise, elegant, impossible to dodge. And as the night stretched on, I realized something chillingly empowering. The longer he kept lying, the better my opportunity to watch him fall. By the time I set my plan in motion, I'd grown almost comfortable with the charade. Michael strutted around the house like a man living a double life and winning at it. Let him think that. I needed him confident, relaxed, unprepared. So one morning, over coffee, I suggested a little get-together. "We should have some friends over," I said lightly, "to celebrate your new healthy habits." His eyes lit up. Oh, the irony. And he agreed without hesitation. He thought the night would be about admiration. He had no idea it would be about exposure. In the days leading up to dinner, I played my part perfectly. I praised his dedication, joked with neighbors about how I could barely keep up with his fitness kick. Every time he smiled proudly, a part of me marveled at how easy it was for him to buy his own lies. He looked in the mirror and saw discipline, progress, a man reinventing himself. What I saw was a house of cards, and I was about to pull the bottom one. I prepared the evening carefully, down to the smallest details. The table was set with elegance, candles, wine, dishes he loved. Everything looked like a celebration. I wanted the stage to be warm, inviting, so that the chill of truth would hit harder when it arrived. Guests trickled in, laughter filled the house, and Michael thrived in the spotlight. He told stories, raised his glass, and carried himself like the star of the show. And I, smiling at his side, knew the real show hadn't even begun. As plates clinked and conversation flowed, I leaned back in my chair, studying Michael like a performer waiting for his cue. He laughed too loudly, gestured too broadly, and basked in every compliment about how dedicated he seemed. If only they knew. I kept my smile soft, my tone sweet, never letting on that the ground beneath him was already cracking. Inside, I felt a strange calm, like I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. When the timing felt right, I turned to him with playful curiosity. "Honey," I said, my voice carrying just enough warmth to mask the edge beneath. "Why don't you tell everyone how far you've been running each night? Was it 5 miles? Or maybe 15? The room chuckled, expecting an easy answer. But Michael froze for a split second before fumbling out a number, one that didn't sound convincing even to his own ears. I caught the flicker of discomfort in his eyes, and it thrilled me. Our guests nodded politely, but I noticed the small details. One colleague tilting his head, another raising an eyebrow. Cracks, subtle but growing. I pressed on gently, careful not to seem sharp, just curious. I asked if he ever tracked his runs, if he had a favorite route, if he felt sore the next day. Simple questions, harmless on the surface. Yet each one made him stumble further, his story wobbling under its own weight. He didn't know it yet, but he was already writing his own downfall. The more he spoke, the more obvious it became. His answers were vague, shifting from one detail to another, like a man trying to build a bridge while walking across it. I tilted my head, nodding as if I believed every word, while inside I savored the cracks spreading wider with each sentence. Guests exchanged quick glances, nothing dramatic yet, but enough to tell me they noticed something wasn't lining up. That was exactly what I wanted. The seed of doubt planted, ready to grow. I watched him dab his forehead with a napkin, even though the room wasn't warm. That nervous tell, so small and unguarded, was almost satisfying to witness. Here he was, the man who called me paranoid, tripping over his own invented miles and imaginary routes. And the best part? He thought he was still convincing us. He didn't see how his confidence was slowly bleeding away, leaving him exposed under the soft glow of candlelight. I let the conversation drift toward lighter topics, giving him a moment to breathe, to think he'd survived. It was important not to rush. This wasn't about one careless slip. It was about building a stage where he'd collapse under the weight of his own lies. And as dessert approached, I knew the perfect moment was waiting just around the corner, one question away from turning his performance into a confession. Dessert was served, the room buzzing with easy chatter, spoons tapping against plates. Michael leaned back, his shoulders a little looser, convinced the hardest part of the evening was behind him. That was my moment. I tilted my glass toward him and said with a playful smile, "Michael, why don't you share your running routine with everyone? I bet they'd love to know your secret." My tone was light, teasing, but my eyes stayed fixed on him, waiting. He chuckled at first, eager to perform again, but the details tangled in his throat. "Well, I usually start at the park near our house," he began, his voice just a bit too loud. But then, too eager to prove himself, he added, "Sometimes I take a shortcut near, by Oakwood." My chest tightened instantly. Oakwood. That was nowhere near our park. It was near her. He didn't even realize what he'd said until silence thickened around the table. I tilted my head, my smile never wavering. Strange, I said softly, my words landing like a pin drop in the quiet. Why would you be near that neighborhood if you're running in our park? The question hung in the air, delicate but sharp, impossible to ignore. Guests looked at him, then at me, their confusion slowly turning into recognition. And in that moment, Michael's confidence faltered, his face paling as though the walls themselves had begun to close in. Michael's laugh came out brittle, too sharp, the kind that betrayed panic more than ease. "Oh, just mixing it up," he stammered, his fork clinking against the plate as his hands trembled. The more he tried to patch the hole, the bigger it became. "Running different routes keeps things interesting," he added quickly, but no one was buying it. His eyes darted between guests, searching for someone to rescue him from the silence. None did. I leaned forward slightly, resting my chin on my hand, as if I were simply curious. Inside, I was electric, every nerve awake. "But isn't Oakwood on the other side of town?" I asked, my voice innocent, almost airy. A colleague cleared his throat. Someone else shifted uncomfortably in their seat. The tension wrapped around the room like a tightening rope, squeezing Michael with every second he hesitated. He tried again, words tripping over themselves, weaving excuses that contradicted the ones before. The more he spoke, the redder his face grew, beads of sweat forming at his temples. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. His own tongue was doing the work for me. And as he dug himself deeper, I realized this wasn't just exposure. This was humiliation, slow and undeniable, and it was only getting started. By now, the room was no longer filled with light chatter. It was thick with whispers and sidelong glances. I watched as Michael's napkin twisted tighter in his hands, his voice growing smaller with every excuse he threw into the air. "Traffic," he muttered at one point, then corrected himself with, "No, I meant training runs." The contradictions piled up, and with each one, I saw the respect in our guests' eyes dim, replaced with suspicion. I sat back, pretending to be puzzled, the picture of a wife trying to make sense of her husband's odd behavior. "It just doesn't add up, does it?" I said quietly, almost to myself, but loud enough for everyone to hear. That single line was enough. It didn't accuse, it didn't condemn. But it pointed a spotlight directly at him, leaving him no shadow to hide in. And the more he flailed, the more obvious his guilt became. Inside, I felt no triumph yet, only focus. This wasn't the moment to show my hand. No, that would come soon enough. For now, I let him unravel, let him sweat under the weight of his own contradictions. By the time dessert plates were cleared, everyone in that room had seen through his facade. He just didn't realize how close he was to the edge of exposure. And I was ready, so ready to give him that final push. The air around the table had shifted. Gone was the easy laughter, replaced by an uneasy quiet that clung to every word. Michael tried to keep talking, desperate to steer the conversation back to safer ground, but no one was following. I watched him fumble with his glass, the wine trembling against the rim, his pride crumbling with each passing second. And then, like a director calling for the final act, I reached into my pocket and placed my phone on the table. The screen lit up, the evidence glowing for all to see. Conversations stopped. All eyes fell on the map displayed clearly, each late-night detour pinned for everyone to witness. Michael's face drained of color, the sweat on his brow glistening under the soft light. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then looked at me as if begging for mercy he didn't deserve. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than any accusation could ever be. Finally, I lifted my gaze, meeting his with a calm that felt almost foreign, even to me. "Thank you, Michael," I said softly, my voice steady, almost gentle. "I don't even need to say a word. You've said it all for me." The room froze. His colleagues shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between us, realizing they'd just been given front-row seats to a truth no one could deny. And in that moment, Michael wasn't just caught. He was undone. Michael's lips moved, fumbling for excuses that had long lost their power. "It's not what it looks like," he stuttered, but the words sounded pitiful, hollow, even to him. The whispers around the table grew louder, one guest leaning into another, shaking their head. The humiliation was no longer private. It was public, raw, and irreversible. He had nowhere to hide, no way to charm his way out. Every second stretched like an eternity, and I let him sit in it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply folded my hands in my lap, serene, like I'd been waiting for this exact moment. And in a way, I had. For weeks, he thought he was fooling me, convincing me, dismissing me as paranoid. Now, in front of the very people whose respect he craved most, his lies collapsed under their own weight. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had spent so much energy running, only to trip over his own tongue. He reached for the wine again, gulping it like a man desperate to drown the shame rising in his chest. I almost pitied him. Almost. But then I remembered the perfume, the nights of gaslighting, the way he smirked when he thought I believed him. No, this wasn't cruelty. This was justice. And as I sat there, calm in the storm, I knew this was only the beginning of his downfall. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. His colleagues looked at him with thinly veiled disgust, some already pushing their chairs back, eager to leave this sinking ship of an evening. Michael sat there, small and trembling, the napkin in his hands twisted to shreds. For once, he wasn't in control. He wasn't the confident husband, the charming friend, the respected man at work. He was just a liar stripped bare in his own home. I stood slowly, collecting plates with steady hands, giving the guests an exit from the suffocating tension. They murmured awkward goodbyes, eyes darting between us, sympathy flickering briefly in my direction. Not that I needed it. I wasn't the one who had something to hide. When the door finally closed behind the last of them, Michael tried to speak again, his voice breaking on my name. But I didn't answer. I didn't have to. My silence was final. That night, I lay in bed wide awake, staring at the man beside me who now looked like a stranger. I thought of the photos, the tracker, the dinner. All of it had led to this unraveling. And while his world had just begun to collapse, mine felt strangely clear, like the first breath after a storm. I knew then what came next, and it wasn't forgiveness. It was freedom. And freedom, I promised myself, would taste even sweeter than revenge. Months passed, and the divorce papers were finally signed. Strangely enough, the day I walked out of the courthouse, I didn't feel broken. I felt lighter, as though I'd shed a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for years. Michael's name was no longer tethered to mine, and that freedom tasted new, sharp, and invigorating. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was just Claire. And for the first time in a long while, that was more than enough. At first, I didn't know what to do with all the empty evenings. No more waiting for him to return from his runs, no more pretending not to notice the lies. The silence of the house felt different now, peaceful instead of hollow. One morning, staring out at the sunrise, I felt an impulse I hadn't expected. To lace up my own shoes and step outside. My feet hit the pavement tentatively at first, but soon the rhythm came. It was my run, my pace, my breath filling the morning air. That first jog wasn't about exercise, it was about reclaiming something. Running had been his excuse, his cover, his stage for betrayal. But now it was mine. Every step I took felt like I was erasing his shadow from my life, carving out space just for me. I wasn't chasing him. I wasn't running from the past. I was moving forward, one stride at a time, into a life that finally belonged to me. Not long after, I found myself joining a local women's running group. At first, I hesitated. Me, a beginner, standing beside women who seemed so strong and confident. But they welcomed me with open smiles and easy laughter, and soon those early mornings became the brightest part of my week. We shared stories as we jogged, stories of heartbreak, of survival, of second chances. In their company, I felt less alone, reminded that I wasn't the only one who had learned to rebuild. The rhythm of our feet hitting the pavement together was more than just exercise. It was therapy. With every stride, I let go of pieces of the past, the gaslighting, the perfume, the dinners filled with lies. Instead, I filled the silence with laughter, with encouragement, with the warmth of women who understood. They didn't see me as someone who'd been betrayed. They saw me as someone running toward her own future. That shift was powerful, almost healing in itself. Sometimes I'd catch the sunrise breaking over the rooftops as we ran, golden light spilling across the streets. And in those moments, I felt a joy so simple and pure, it almost surprised me. I wasn't defined by what Michael had done. I wasn't trapped in the role of the betrayed wife. I was just Claire, a woman with flushed cheeks, steady breath, and the wind at her back, and that was more than enough. Now each morning when I lace up my shoes, it feels like a quiet ritual of independence. The road ahead isn't about miles or speed, it's about freedom. Every stride is a reminder that I chose myself, that I refused to stay shackled to lies. Sometimes the memory of Michael flickers, his smirk, his dismissals, his perfume-soaked alibis, but they no longer sting. They're just echoes of a story I've already outgrown. One day, as I ran with the group, laughter bubbling around me, I realized something profound. He had spent his nights running away from honesty, from commitment, from the woman who loved him. And me? I was running for myself, for health, for joy, for the life I almost forgot I deserved. The contrast couldn't be sharper, and I carried it with me like fuel, each breath stronger than the last. By the time I reached the end of that morning's run, the sun was high, warming my face, filling me with a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I stopped, hands on my knees, smiling as my heart pounded, not from betrayal, but from life. And as I straightened, I whispered to myself, almost like a promise, he ran from honesty. I run for me,